new school year begins, I hear the repeated refrain, "Be good and do what your teacher tells you," as moms, dads, and caregivers exit my first grade classroom. I wonder, does our world, which is growing hotter, flatter, and more crowded each day, need classrooms where students learn to repeat what their teachers tell them? How can I best prepare my students to be lifelong learners in the 21st century, to be innovators and problem solvers, to develop collaborative skills, empowering them to consider purposes and audiences beyond the walls of our small rural classroom? Several years ago, I discovered that I could use a simple digital voice recorder to be more intentional about changing the expectations in my classroom from teacher as holder of all the right answers to a more inquiry stance where students and teachers researched alongside each other. This changed the focus. It became very important to hear each student's voice and what he or she could contribute to the conversation. Using digital voice recorders to capture their discussions, my first graders would situate themselves in small groups around our classroom ready to participate in book talks, talks that examined, probed, and took an investigative stance around a picture book before I asked them to write a response. These captured conversations invited readers to push up against or take a critical view of an overarching social, environmental, or fairness issue. At the same time, as a learning community, we replayed these conversations many times to notice how smart our brains were as we named each other's wonders, predictions, connections, inferences, and theories embedded in the saved conversations. This year, after reading Bill Pete's book, The Wump World, a story telling of a small planet of wump creatures invaded by a swarm of aliens called pollutants, which polluted the small planet while the wumps hid in fear underground, my first graders reminded each other to think about their thinking. With digital recorders in hand, they circled together, started their recorders, and began discussing their thoughts about the book.
I wonder about Olivia. I wonder what will happen. What will the chief do? I'm wondering if they're going to discover the caves that the wumps are in and then go in the wumps cave and then pollute the cave. I think that the pollutants are going to find out that the wumps are in the cave and kill them.
Hearing their voices let my learners know their teacher believed their thinking was important. This was huge because it shifted learning expectations.
You need more thinking time? I wonder about what is going to happen to the wumps. What? Are they going to know that they are gone? Or are they not going to know they're gone? Okay.
The risk in speaking was not in trying to find the one right answer in the teacher's mind. The challenge became thinking innovatively and critically.
I think the pollutes are gonna every world they polluted, they're gonna help them make a big difference to their world. But in the name there's the word pollute, and I think they're not going to make a big difference. They're just going to keep polluting every planet in the solar system.
Hearing their voices allowed learners to trust their brains, to come up with ideas for answering their own wonders and the questions brought forth by their peers regarding the shared book and their lived lives.
I think that they're going to stand up and march right out of that cave and say, look what you've done to our air. We made this all clean, and that's how we live. We need to eat some grass, and we need some water. And you dump trash into our water, and you took our food away.
Hearing their voices, engage students to activate schema and dig further into their texts.
What I wonder about is, are the wombats going to save their planet, or let the pollutants destroy their world? Do you have a respond or anything, Olivia? I think the ones are just going to all just stay in the cave for the rest of their life and just let them pollute their world and make it die.
Technology in the form of WAV files allowed my learners opportunities to listen to their thinking again and again and again, teasing the reflective, insightful, and smart thinking from each piece. Surprisingly, I discovered that the repeated listenings mentored my first graders in ways to talk to each other about books. They began using the same vocabulary I was using when talking about their thinking. They supported each other by asking about a peer's wonder or requesting a response for his or her own question, even naming a plan to add on to someone else's idea. Hearing their voices spilled into other content areas as students talked about their intentions as writers, scientists, and when trying to negotiate relationships with classmates. They used more literary language, or book talk, as the first graders refer to it, in their personal pieces of writing, as you can hear in LJ's written response to Wump World.
Now the Wumps have happier days. The grass grows big and the trees are big. They had a good world. The pollutants looked for a new world. I think the planet is Pluto. The Wumps are lucky and the pollutants are not lucky. They should be friends.
Being able to hear their voices gave wings to my students' words, allowing us to burn CDs to send home to share with family and friends and post on our classroom website. This ability to take students' voices outside the classroom and into the popular culture engaged my first graders as I have never before experienced. Hearing their voice moved me to consider how I had marginalized students in the past by not listening, thinking I knew their worlds. Without hearing their voices, I set limits on their learning potentials. There is a great diversity of lived experiences within the four walls of my classroom, where I now believe I must create a safe and engaging environment for student voices to be part of the co-constructing of understanding if the problems of our flattening, warming, and increasingly depleted world are to be solved. So a simple little technology tool, a digital voice recorder, paired with computers and internet accessibility, has allowed me to dramatically change learning for my first graders. Through my guidance, voice recorders have opened a window, allowing my students to know they have the power to think of answers to big questions with their peers. Teaching with these technology pieces has set these young learners on an educational path
where they are active participants, researching, seeking answers, considering choices outside the teacher, and sharing their thinking and composing beyond our classroom walls. Hearing their voices can change learning.